Welcome back to the Barbell Medicine YouTube channel. I'm Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum. We have Dr. Awesome Baraki in the studio, live, in the flesh. That's real. He's in town this week, and we decided to answer some questions from the internet. Next question. This was actually a pretty long question that I got, and I try to make these questions as generalizable as possible so the most amount of people can get something out of it versus, one individual person says, I have this very specific case, can you answer my question? It's like, that's probably better suited for a consult because there's probably more information we need to get anyway. So the thrust of this question was, what would be your estimation at what age that I will set my all-time 1 rep max PRs? With the idea being like, I am this certain age, this guy was in his 30s, for example, he has recently started training, he's like, how long till I hit my lifetime best PRs? And like, is that different from, based on his gender, right? Man versus woman. Is it different based on his age? Like if he would have started earlier, is there a different trajectory? And the way I kind of answer this question is, I don't know how long it's gonna take for you to reach your peak performance, but it is likely to be many, many years after you start training, unless something else outside of your control happens.
Yeah, sure.
So like something tragic, the car accident, or you otherwise stop training and are unable to actually continue on your upwards trajectory. I don't think that there's a big difference in age or gender as far as what that trajectory looks like. I would expect people who are outside of the exception, if someone was very, very young, like prepubescent, I wouldn't expect like that trajectory to look the same as somebody who started in their mid-teens.
Sure.
But I would expect a similar trajectory from somebody in their mid-teens or 20s as somebody in their 40s who they both started training at the same time. The absolute amount of weight that they end up lifting may be different, but the relative improvement, that's probably going to track similarly. It doesn't really matter if they're man or woman either, at least as far as me predicting how they're going to do. And just because I always have to drop David Ricks in here.
There's lots of people that we could drop, like him as one very good example.
Sure. 58 years old, currently holds the all-time world record squat at 700 and I think it's 711 or 718 or something. In the 93 kilo weight class, and I've seen him set or attempt a world record squat every year seemingly since 2013 where he was 53, and it's like he's a machine. He's just a machine. Actually, that math doesn't really check out if he was 53, so now it's 52, 59. Anyway, you guys can do the math at home. You have the calculator out. We got too much technology here, but the whole point is like, I don't know where the peak is and then where that falls off. Like, is it in your 40s if you started in your 20s, for example? Is it in your 50s? At some point, it's going to happen. It just hasn't happened for that particular individual, and I don't know that I could predict that for somebody.
Yeah, I think anybody who, it's perfectly reasonable if you're watching this to hear, the reference to Dave and be like, yeah, well, he's a freak. He's all the way at one end of the bell curve of the population as far as their strength potential. And it's like, sure, but the point is that any one person could have submitted this question and we cannot predict in advance where they are on the thing.
Yeah.
So you can go and you can find studies, you can find, normative data on this, descriptive data sets that say, in general, peak strength for men, because they're going to sex stratify it, is going to be in their mid-30s or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's like, cool. Now, you're a person. You're not the mean of that study.
Sure, yeah.
Right? And so that number may be problematic for you, because maybe you just started training, in your mid-30s, and you're like, well, shit, there's no way now because I'm already past this peak. And it's like, well, not really, because that may not be you. Maybe you turn out to be the freak, and you should probably train as if you are the freak until proven otherwise.
Until proven otherwise, yeah. You may not have identified the right strategy to do so if you haven't.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this all the time with my own, start in strength training. I had a relatively unremarkable beginner phase of training, and it took several more years. Like you've referenced your first year of training before a few times, right? So your first year was decidedly freaky,
sure,
right? Pulled 550 or something in your first year of training. That was definitely not the case for me. It took me, I don't know, maybe more like 3 years or something like that. And some people, it takes a decade. Some people, they're never able to do it. But then interestingly, despite that marked difference in our first year of training, now our numbers are like extremely similar, like within a couple percent of one another on all 3 lifts. And so nobody could have predicted that from the way things started. And yeah, I mean, remains to be seen what happens in the next decade, I guess.
Sure, yeah. And I guess the final point here is like, I don't know that it matters what your peak strength ends up being from like a health perspective.
I know that it doesn't.
Yeah, well,
actually.
Yeah. So actually, this is kind of a second. It's not parts of this question, but we were asked like, you got to come up with some strength standards for health, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, and both Austin and I were like, no, because we can't. And I keep thinking about this question, and my thought is like, I actually don't know if it matters if you actually get markedly stronger, because I actually think the participation in the exercise itself is probably like the more useful thing. It'd be very difficult to not actually gain strength just by like participating. But what I'm getting at is that if somebody's like, I gained 20% on my squat in a year and another person gained 2% on their squat in a year, I'm like, that doesn't tell me whether there's any like health difference there based on your exercise participation. Because I think they're about the same. If somebody was like, I could go further, 100%, you doubled your squat versus 2%, I'm like, all I know for sure is that you can squat more than this person, but if you guys spent the same amount of time in the gym, the same like exercise duration, etc., like I feel like the health benefits you're getting out of training are pretty similar. And then the programming and some other like outside the gym considerations like nutrition and sleep and stuff like that are going to really help me figure out like who's actually going to gain more muscle, because I don't know that the person who's gained 100% on their squat actually has gained more lean body mass, which I also think is important to like this health thing. So my strength standards, like how strong do you actually have to get to be healthy? It's like, I think you just have to try. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like you just have to be actively participating in this stuff. And to the extent you need to hit a certain number, I don't have those numbers. I refuse to like give those numbers because I don't think that they're meaningful. They're literally just made up and have no evidence. I could tell you a hand grip dynamometer value that you need to achieve, right? And it's like,
yeah, there are certain. If you look at like the sarcopenia literature, there are strength and lean body mass standards that you'll see described in terms of how strong your hand grip strength should be, how much appendicular, meaning lean body mass on your arms and your legs that you should have. But those are also correlational relationships. So it's like this correlates with better outcomes. We have less evidence on, okay, I'm going to take somebody with this lower hand grip strength to this standard of hand grip strength, and all of a sudden things are going to get much better. I do think, we've talked about this when people are worried about being non-responders to training, and we've cited some of those papers on the more outcomes you measure from training, the fewer apparent non-responders there are, meaning that everybody improves in some fashion just from participation in exercise or resistance exercise in particular. There probably are some health outcomes that are more heavily mediated by actually getting stronger or increasing lean body mass, things like bone mineral density, things like that will be like maybe fall risk, fracture risk. Although even then, I imagine that things like fall risk probably can improve just from like neuromuscular skill improvements, independent of actual strength and lean body mass. So this stuff gets kind of complicated. I think we will probably end up having to provide some sort of a standard, but I would be more willing to provide a standard in terms of relative strength improvements. So a percent improvement from baseline, and basically saying it would be reasonable to train somebody in order to achieve this relative improvement from baseline, rather than saying everybody needs to squat 225 or something like that, because that's definitively not the case.
Right. Yeah. And then the idea would be, if you are not attaining this relative improvement, it's either underdosed or the wrong formulation.
Yeah.
So to me, it's more just like, well, if you didn't actually get stronger, it's a programming issue.
Yeah.
Rather than like, some willpower or like inherent defect in somebody. Cool.